So here's what we'll be covering tonight. We'll start off with Tracy Herbert talking a bit about who the BCRC is. We'll then turn it over to Dr. Bart Lardner to talk about refining corn grazing recommendations, and then we'll open it up to questions from yourselves and end with some closing remarks and where you can find a bit more information. So with that, let's get started. I would like to introduce our first speaker is Tracy Herbert. Tracy is the Extension and Communications Director for the BCRC, where she oversees the development, maintenance, and utilization of various research and extension tools, including our own website, beefresearch.ca.
Thank you, Stacy. And hi, everybody. So it sounds like a few of you are participating in your very first BCRC webinar, so welcome. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to have you become just a little bit more familiar with what we do here. So we are an industry group. We use dollars to leverage, industry dollars to leverage government and other funding and invest in research that benefits our industry. And it's producers who decide what types of objectives that we tackle with those industry dollars. So these are the members of the council. They represent BC through to PEI, as well as seed stock through to feeders. And the BCRC gets industry money through the national checkoff. So there's actually two separate levies, the provincial and the national, and they're distinct. So in many provinces, the provincial checkoff is $2. It's $3 or $3.50 in a few of them. And that money is used for provincial initiatives and to fund the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. So that's the provincial checkoff. The national levy, which is called the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff, is used for two things: marketing and promotion of Canadian beef domestically and internationally, which is done by an organization called Canada Beef, and research, which we manage here at the BCRC. And as you've likely been hearing, producers across the country are wanting to increase their investment into the industry to achieve goals that have been set out in the National Beef Strategy. So the national checkoff is proposed to increase. So by the end of 2018, most provinces will have increased their collection of the national checkoff to $2.50 per head. And the BCRC is proposed to get about 75 cents from that. What a $2.50 national checkoff means for research is the ability to continue working on improvements in priority areas like forage and grassland productivity, environmental stewardship, animal health and welfare, feed grains and feed efficiency, antimicrobials, food safety, beef quality, all of those things. And so we've actually been drawing down our reserve to be able to fund some of those high priority projects in those areas. And even in doing so, the existing funding is just too low to be able to support all the research that our industry needs. And when we don't invest in those things, government doesn't either. Increased national checkoff will also build research capacity and program funding in areas that have been on the decline in Canada. So for example, we need more producer-focused forage breeders and agronomists and grazing researchers to be trained and hired here in Canada. And an increased checkoff can put us in the position to be able to do that. It'll maintain and build better surveillance networks, which are critical for industry to be able to demonstrate the integrity of the Canadian beef supply, and to identify areas where research or even changes in production practices can help us raise cattle better or more profitably. I'd create a role for a domestic and international research liaison who would look for practices and technologies across the country and around the world that might have the potential to benefit more producers here and find ways to modify them so Canadian producers can use those on their own operations. It'll also enable greater tech transfer and extension to get research results and improved practices and technology from scientific publications into the hands of producers. as well as ongoing delivery of the Verified Beef Production Plus program, which is becoming increasingly important in verifying sustainable production practices to our customers. So those are the Coles notes. The latest issue of the Gatepost, which is the National Checkoff Agency's e-newsletter, has a more detailed explanation, and it also explains what an increase in checkoff means for marketing and promotion, as well as issues management. And Stacy can include a link to this in the email that she sends to you all in a few days. And conversations will keep happening about this at cattle producer meetings across the country. Most of the provincial associations are about to kick off their fall district meeting series. And I know that district meetings in Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta all start in about a week and a half. Be on Monday the 23rd is when they'll start in those provinces. And so, you know, spending a couple of hours one evening in the next few weeks when they're hosting a meeting at a hall not too far from you is one of the best ways to find out what those groups are working on, how checkoff is being used, and then even to have your own voice heard as well. So you could find the dates and times and locations of those on their respective websites or on ours, beefresearch.ca, on our calendar of events. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Stacy to kick off the main presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Tracy. So if you do have any questions for Tracy regarding the checkoff, please, or the BCRC in general, type them into that chat window on the side of your screen, and she'll answer them at the end of the hour. So before we get started on our next panelist, we will do a quick poll here. So this is your opportunity to participate in tonight's webinar. You'll see the poll come up on your screen, and your answers here are anonymous to everybody else who is on the webinar. So we just ask that you answer the poll here, and it'll give us a bit more of an idea of who's on the line tonight. So the first question here, are you planning on grazing corn this winter? Yes, no, but we've done it in the past. No, but we plan to do it in the future. Just no, or you're unsure. So I'll give you guys a couple more minutes here, or a couple more seconds to get the answers in, and then we'll see where everybody's at. Okay. So for tonight's poll, it looks like about 46, so just under half, are planning on grazing corn this winter. A couple of you have done it in the past but aren't planning on doing it now. 23% say that no, they're not planning on it this winter, but they're thinking for the future. 23% also say no, that they're not, and about 6% are still unsure. So we'll move on to the next poll question here, which is, what is the #1 reason you would consider grazing corn on your operation? So is it that it's a low-cost system, the high yield of corn, the labor, or is it the high nutritive value of corn versus other extended grazing crops? And we have one more question here for you. So the next question for you is, what so once again, this is the main limiting factor. close right away here. So it looks like it's pretty evenly split between So with that, I will turn it over to our next presenter. So our next presenter here is Dr. Bart Lardner, who is the Senior Research Scientist at the Western Beef Development Center. So for the past 20 years, Dr. Lardner has worked at Western Beef Development Center as a scientist focusing on cow-calf and forage production research, where he has many years of practical experience in the cow-calf, feedlot, and animal health sector of the beef industry. He's also an adjunct professor with the Department of Animal and Poultry Science at the University of Saskatchewan. So you should be able to show your screen there, Bart.
Can you see my screen, Stacy?
It's just taking a second to load here, I think. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, we're good, right?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Stacy and Tracy, for participating in this webinar. Really, the focus of my talk this evening is about managing grazing plant corn, but I really want to back up and talk a little bit about some of the reasons why a producer would think about going down this particular path. I also want to acknowledge my co-authors on this presentation, and that's Stephanie McMillan, Divya Josie, Brianne Anderson. These are grad students that are working with me, and also my colleague, our beef economist at Western Beef Development Center, Kathy Larson. There we go. So Western Beef Development Center has been around for 20 years. We're really an applied forage and cow-calf system, and we really focus on doing research that a producer can utilize or think about integrating into their operation, focusing on the cow-calf sector and on forage management. So we do a lot of speaking engagements, producer workshops, and we use hard copy as well to get our information out. But we also utilize social media, as you can see, and so feel free to join myself or Kathy on all the information, research findings going through that social medium, Twitter. We need to really look at feed, and that it really is the single largest variable cost in beef production, and changes every year. And it really, based on Kathy's work, is shown to account 60–65% of total cost to keep that mother cow on that farm or the ranch over the calendar year. And a lot of work done by Dwayne McCartney showed that there's really alternative winter systems out there that can move the cow out of the dry lot pen with the opportunity to reduce some of these feed costs compared to having to move the feed or bring it into the yard with using that equipment factor. But why do they produce or look at adopting these wintering systems? To reduce those feed and labor costs and try to manage body condition, and also the economic benefits, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And really, corn, the topic we're talking about tonight, it's looked at for its high yield potential, obviously its nutritive value, and hopefully the ability to maintain that feed quality throughout the winter months. Just a little bit about some of the extensive work that we've done at Western Beef. What are your goals if you're planning to have cows out in extensive grazing? Obviously, trying to reduce winter feed costs, the fixed costs, variable costs, dry lot feeding, paid unpaid labor, those types of things. But really, can we capture the value of manure and nutrients? That's a big factor as well. But what's the objective? When we go into a winter feeding system with the cows, We're trying to maintain body condition all through those winter months and have those cows coming out in respectable body condition prior to calving. Some of these systems that are out there, producers have adopted, obviously stockpile forage grazing. Bale grazing has been a big factor the last 10, 15, 20 years. You can see in this picture behind, that's a bale grazing programs we've done at Western Beef in the past. Utilizing crop residues, so integrating the cropping system with the livestock system. Utilizing cereals, pulse, oil seeds, different crops in the straw, the chaff, knowing that they're probably not going to be adequate in energy and protein, and we need to do those feed tests to bring up that supplementation program. And also grazing these annual crops, the cool seasons, barley, the oat, triticale, warm seasons, millet, and of course tonight we'll talk about utilizing whole plant corn in the field. I think we need to take a step back and remember that guess what? We need to look at what is the energy and protein requirements of that gestating beef cow throughout the calendar month you need. And we know the range really does vary from a low of 45 to a high of 61% TDN. Also on crude protein side, going from 6 to 11%. I don't care whether you're a January calving herd or May calving herd, we also need to look at those fluctuations in nutrient requirements. And is there a time of the year when we could take advantage or opportunity, maybe in that time we weaned that calf and she's in first, second trimester of pregnancy, and put her into that extensive wintering program. But realize too, we do live in a seasonal effect of winter. We do have cold spells to deal with, and that energy requirements for that beef cow ramp up significantly. The wind chill factor is the biggest thing, combined with the cold temperature. What factors should we consider? Well, obviously, have adequate wind protection out there, please. Animal does not have natural shelter belts or portable windbreaks. She will lose body condition, mobilize energy reserves. There's these tools at our disposal nowadays called electric fencing. We use them to control animal access, control utilization, reduce wastage of that field crop, and certainly need to think about water, the water point, the water source, a variety of wintering systems out there, wet wells, insulated troughs, cross-free nose pumps you can set up on your operation to allow you to have cattle on several locations throughout your farm or your ranch. This is what you want to see. Post-grazing is a nice level layer of manure and nutrients. So you've met the objective to deposit those urine and fecal nutrients out there to allow for the subsequent crop coming in the spring. This is unfortunately what you don't want to see. These environmental impacts happened to us at Western Beef, no different than you as a producer. This was in 06. We were trying to background calves on some swaths millet, and we had 2 freezing rains and a blizzard. And that feed stuff was like, it was frozen. It was asking calves to consume frozen celery. And so prehension of the feed is a big factor. You need to manage and monitor if you're going to have these cattle on these wintering systems. Let's talk about the benefits of why you're going to look at having cattle out on extensive grazing. I want to briefly touch on a few points about some work we did, kind of a flagship study. We did a bale grazing study. We also had bale processing on 2 field programs. That would be the bale grazing site and the bale processing site out on a field. We compared it then to a dry lock system feeding in a pen. We also were able to put out some manure and compost on that old, tired Russian wild rye pasture. It was a pasture that needed to be broke up and reseeded, but guess what? We were going to try and apply nutrients 2 ways, either with machinery, with the tractor, the manure spreader, or maybe with the 4-legged lawnmower, the beef cow. And so how did that old, tired pasture respond after we were either bale grazing, bale processing, or putting manure nutrients out there with the equipment? Here we can see soil nitrogen, nitrate, and ammonium nitrogen levels pre-grazing. These are the red bars, okay, very similar, our fall soil test levels. After the cows were out there over the winter, we saw 2.5, 3 times nitrate, ammonium nitrogen out there where the cows were wintering, either bale grazing or bale processing, compared to where that manure was put on with that equipment. That tells me that, you know what, some of those nutrients have left that dry lot pen, that bedding pack, that straw pack, and they're not there for that crop. But they're certainly readily there in those urine patches, fecal patties, when those cows are out there in that grazing program. How did that old pasture respond? Well, guess what? It saw a 270% increase where those cows wintered on that perennial pasture compared to where we put that manure out there with the equipment. So that's what producers are looking at, is this rejuvenation, renovation aspect. We also looked at nutrient cycling. Okay, so we're just looking at the percent of protein in these round bales that went through the cow and what percent showed up in the perennial forage the following year. It's not a closed system, okay? There is some escape, but we could account for what? 34% of the nitrogen that started out in the round bale showed up here in the pasture grass the following spring, about 22% of the phosphorus, okay? Let's look at that dry lot feeding system. What did we account for when we looked at nitrogen and phosphorus in those two systems? Only 7% of the nitrogen and 4% of the phosphorus. So really, this is what producers are seeing, is that the manure nutrients are out there because you're field grazing. We did some real accounting here with our engineering friends, finding out that yes, that's a level of nitrogen and phosphorus in feces, a level in urine as well, because I chose to winter 64 cows on 110 days on that particular pasture. Even if 30% of it left, 70% of those nutrients retained, I have roughly a little over 100 pounds of nitrogen for the subsequent crop the following year. So that really is the attraction. Let's talk now really about the corn management system, the attraction to it. It's the crop that really has struck me as something we never thought about growing in Western Canada, especially Saskatchewan, or through the prairies themselves about 10, 15 years ago. And so we've seen a lot of development with this particular variety. The first variety that I did some work with about 15, 16 years ago was called Amazing Graze, 3,000 heat unit variety from Baldridge Farms, Ohio. Certainly didn't process because I only get about 1,900, 2,000 heat units at Lanigan, Saskatchewan, located. And so hence, the breeders went back, did a lot of selection, and so these 2050 heat unit varieties we see today are really adapted and really do produce the biomass. Why would beef producers grow corn? Well, certainly grain production, we see that coming on stream, silage for the dairy industry, and silage for the beef industry as well, because it's high yielding and high energy compared to maybe alfalfa or some of those haylage type crops. So really, is there an opportunity to graze whole plant corn with cows out in the field and hopefully do it correctly? First thing we need to look at is what are the corn heat units where I live, okay? And so if you're going to buy a variety, certainly you find one that's going to be applicable to the heat units that you get, whether you're in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or Alberta. I'm right here at Lanigan, Saskatchewan, just east of Saskatoon, about an hour and a half, as I said, about 2,000 heat units on average. I've been talking about corn in all over Western Canada, so up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, down in Estevan, Saskatchewan, and even out in BC and Prince George. So it's a crop that we're seeing moving throughout the western provinces, and certainly there's pros and cons with managing this crop, and we'll talk about some of those things. So figure out your corn heat units, where you live. I go to several websites. Here's some choices, Alberta websites, provincial websites, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. But the one I use as well is farmzone.com. I find that quite nice. It gives you a location, it gives you growing degree days, min-max temperatures, and corn heat. We'll talk briefly some agronomics to kind of grow this crop. These low heat unit varieties are out there. They do some feeding mid-May. Well, guess what? I don't get my fields ready at Lanigan until the end of May, early June. I've grown corn May 29th, June 1, June 9th, and I've still had a fantastic crop. So it's a resilient crop. Once it gets up and going, it does really produce the biomass. Suggested to be about 30,000 seeds per acre. There's the metric, 70,000 to 8,750. But yeah, you really want to look at precision by putting number of seeds per acre. Soil temperature needs to be warm though. But don't get too early. Make sure your soil temperature is warmed up. This is a big factor, about that 10 degrees Celsius, and it does need to be seeded deep, about 1.5 inches. It's not like a forage. You do need to put it down there fairly deep. And row spacing is so crucial because of the competition. It really does not handle weed pressure very well, and so henceforth row spacing is important. And so I'm going to suggest using a corn planter versus air drills. We've done both the types of studies at Western Beef. I found using that air drill, I'm reducing my biomass 15–20%, using that per acre. The precision corn planters out there, there's lots of them showing up in the country. Work with local agronomists, maybe several producers getting together and purchasing one. We're seeing that happening as well. Soil test, know what you're working with. If you've got cows out there in successive years, you're going to find lots of nitrogen around, or possibly phosphorus for sure, but we're suggesting applying that rate with the corn. I put up to about 100 pounds based on what my soil test levels come. It's a high end user, okay? And it also needs phosphorus, potassium, and sodium. I'll talk a little bit about weed pressure here. As I said, it is not handle weed pressure at all. And so the suggestion is obviously burn off pre-emergence, and then probably 2 shots, one at the 4-leaf, one at the 8-leaf stage, just to get that weed pressure, reduce those weeds. You will reduce yields. We've done both. We've only done 1 application of glyphosate at the 4-leaf stage, but significant weeds came back, and we did see reduced yields in the So the technology is there with these Roundup Ready varieties to take advantage of that. It's a high input, high risk crop, and I'll mention that many times. You are putting a lot of dollars per acre into the ground for grazing beef cows, so do it right. If you don't like farming, maybe work with your neighbor who's a cropping guy. You just like to run cows, maybe team up with folks, do the research, find out how you're going to do it correctly. It is high input, high risk, and guess what? Frost will happen about every 3-4 years. An early frost in August frost. We've had them. They've killed the crop, severely damaged the crop, and so we've seen less than half of our grazing days in those frost years. So always have Plan B in your back pocket. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Just have corn grazing for your extensive feeding program. Have these other ones: the stockpile forage, the bale grazing, maybe the residue grazing, spot grazing, other alternatives to go to. Where does it fit into the grazing program? Well, certainly a very highly nutritive crop. It's a crop actually that meets or exceeds what a cow requires in first, second, and possibly third trimester of pregnancy for energy, okay? In fact, I've seen cows put on condition grazing corn in those warmer falls, warmer winters, versus other types of systems where you're going to have to provide a supplement. So the other systems I talked about, we're looking at energy protein supplement. With corn, it typically is supplying adequate energy protein for it to meet her requirement. I will say though, the protein does get a little bit low if that cow is close to calving and will be calving coming off of a cornfield. So you might have to bring in a protein supplement back end if you're grazing your cows right up to calving on that corn crop. Talk about growing wean calves. I'm going to focus on cows, but guess what? I'll talk about how would a 5-weight calf utilize whole plant corn, and we have some research findings as well we'll discuss here this evening. A bit about stage of maturity at first killing frost. So there's several suggestions. I'm going to say it should be at half milk line. Your goal hopefully is to have about 50% starch, 50% fiber per acre out there. Remember that corn plant has that cob, the cob's full of starch. Starch will cause rumen acidosis. So make sure that you know what stage maturity it's going to be at. If it does get a little mature, there's some other things we're going to talk about to mitigate rumen acidosis. There's some other suggestions, maybe plant it a little bit early, so it does, a little bit later, prior to what you would typically seed it, so it doesn't get into that black layer. We see other guys maybe plant a couple of varieties together, okay? Or maybe find a variety that's about 200 heat units more than what you get in your area, so it never does get to black layer. It does stay in that half milk line at that first killing frost. You know, I've grazed even beyond half milk line over the years at some of our research at Western Beef, and I really manage and monitor. I make sure those cows are not hungry going out there, get them well adapted to that crop prior to going on. Yeah, so here's this just a hybrid selection of what stage to graze at, or hopefully freezing. What that R5 stage, you can see here the half milk line. It's laying down that starch, and we don't want to see it out here in that black layer. So looking at the nutritive value of this crop, it's very nutritive. As I said earlier, most of the dry matter by weight volume is in that cob, in the cob itself compared to the rest. The stalk, the tassel, the leaves, most of the weight volume is in the cob and the grain. You look at the fiber content, where's the fiber? It's in the tassel, the leaf, the husk, okay? That's what the rumen needs to mitigate buffer pH, okay? So that's the fiber component. Here is the energy component. So be aware of that when you're allocating days grazing out there in your fields. We strongly suggest limiting grazing time. That's what we're suggesting. You're going to do what you feel comfortable doing. Guess what? These guys are very selective in what structure on the plant they're going to consume. Okay? So they will go after cobs first. They will figure out that's the ice cream part of the plant. If you give them 40 acres, if you give them 100 acres, they're going to go out and eat cobs for 2-3 days, and you're going to wind up with issues. Okay? So I'm strongly suggesting days of grazing only. Day 1, they're going to go out and pick the cobs. Day 2, day 3, they're going to have to be forced to eat the staff, the tassel, the stalk, and the fiber component of the plant. So we're suggesting that. Producers have used other days allocation and feel quite comfortable doing it, but certainly that's our suggestion. We'll leave, obviously, the stalk right to the very last. We're doing some work. I'll talk about those results tonight on a 3-day versus 9-day allocation of corn, with or without a fiber source, to try and mitigate that root process. And I'll talk a little bit about naive cows. You know, our cows certainly weren't used to grazing corn when we first put them out there. In fact, what they did is they grazed all the dead grass around the fence post, and they avoided those corn stalks like you wouldn't believe. About 24 hours later, that one cow went over and took a bite. Guess what? It tasted pretty good. And it was a leader follower after that. Everybody dived in. You have to give them a little bit of time. What we have also done is we put out a little round bale. Okay, so round bales, maybe give them only 4 or 5 rows of corn with that portable electric fence. So kind of start off with, they have some round bale hay to consume, and then slowly a little bit of corn, and then maybe over a week to wean them off the hay, and then let them go full bent on corn if you feel comfortable. If not, keep that hay there on a lesser account as a fiber source. I strongly suggest having a good trace mineral program. Okay, a well-balanced, all your macros and micros in there. Your alphos certainly has to be that 2-to-1 or greater, and make sure you have a good trace mineral of your micro minerals, your copper, zinc, and manganese. So obviously, I know you're all out there feeding trace minerals anyway, but it's just good to remind ourselves. Just a little bit about some of the results of some grazing research we've done at WBDC. This is a trial. We looked at 5 different corn varieties, okay, varying in heat units, 2050 to 2250, seeded June 1, and then grazed November 19th to February 28th. So what do I look at in results of what I'm getting? This is the dry matter biomass on the top, averaging about 5 tons. Our annual cereals are only giving us about 2.5 tons of dry matter, our barleys, our oats. But that's the attraction there. You're growing more biomass per acre. We know the cost of land today. Where is the nutritive value? Well, it's ranging from 7.4 on the whole plant, and obviously a lot more in the cob and the leaf in terms of protein energy content, as well is a little higher in the cob. It's about 89% down here, and the whole plant on about 70% TDN. These are our costs. This is a fact sheet on our website, WBC website, which I'll give you at the back end of this webinar. These are our costs at Lanigan, Saskatchewan. So I strongly encourage you to find out what your costs are. Kathy put a lot of costs in there that you may not think about. Okay, and there's some asterisks on the back, on the bottom there about feeding rates and some input costs. And our costs for these 5 varieties range from 206 to 23 per acre. So as I said, high input, and certainly you want to see some significant grazing. And we measured those grazing days. Okay, so they range from 145 to 318, depending on the variety. I always feel if I'm getting 200 grazing days per acre, I'm gonna meet my input costs. And everything after that, if it goes up 250, 300, I'm going to reduce my grazing cost per cow per day. So our costs in our particular study range from 70 cents to $1.42. This was some work we did about 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, those costs are probably going to go up a little bit with today's prices, input costs. But it just gives you an idea. Right now, Kathy is suggesting that dry lot feeding your cow is going to run about $2.50, maybe a little bit more. So really, that may be the attraction by having that cow out in that field. So can these wean calves actually utilize whole plant corn? And so this is some work we did looking at maybe backgrounding calves. In this aspect, we need to look at the considerations of energy and protein for those growing calves. Now we have a growing animal, not a pregnant animal, okay? So do we graze it standing? Do we swath it? What's your targeted gain? You need to have a targeted gain if you're going to background calves, okay? So is it 1 pound a day? Is it a pound and a half? Maybe you're going to get extravagant and go 2.5 pounds or 2 pounds, sorry. Make sure you know your target end weight, what you're starting with. The 3 systems we had out there were corn. We had swath, barley, and field paddocks. These are the 2 field systems compared to backgrounding calves in a dry lot pen using processed barley hay or green feed. We also provided, because they're growing calves, we need them to gain weight, a supplemental pellet out there in those 3 systems at about 4 pounds per head per day. All these calves went through the backgrounding system, and then we put them into the feedlot to see, did that backgrounding have a negative effect on their performance in the feedlot? They received 2 types of feedlot diets, either corn grain in the diet or barley grain. And I guess I need to back up and say, guess what? You know, Mother Nature will throw a curveball into your plans. No different for us at Western Beef. This is a picture on the left of the calves going out to the extensive grazing, and that's them coming back in after about a month and a half. So snow depth could be a limiting factor, especially for swath grazing. You can graze corn a little bit longer because it is standing, but even in this particular winter, that didn't happen. Utilization is a big thing. Okay, I strive to get greater than 90% of the calves to clean up what's out there. You're going to see some of these left after the grazing event. We come in the spring with a heavy summer's disc to chop those up. It works works really well to get that field prepped. In fact, you'll never know. Residue doesn't seem to be an issue with germination of the corn the following year. But as I said, wind, snow depth, temperature will play havoc on your winter plans. This is the nutritive value of the corn and the barley crops over a 3-year period. Okay, and you can see again that energy is not too bad with our barley or our corn here, but certainly the protein is a little bit low on that corn, especially for a gestating beef cow coming into calving. How do these calves do out in those background programs? Well, here's the field calves. They gained about 1.3 a day. There's our dry lot calves. You can see this is the start weight here, and this is the end weight. So we were able to put on some gain out in the field. What was their feedlot performance like? Well, you see some compensatory happened out there. They all finished gaining about 4.139 a day, and all finishing similar finish weights. Okay, so even though those were little lighter calves coming in into the program, compensatory kicked in at the end of the day. Our cost to gain, we compared that, the barley swath cows, whole plant corn grazing in the field, compared to dry lot, found that the barley swaths were 50 and the whole plant corn were 53% lower compared to the dry lot system. So there's some maybe a detraction, certainly a system that you're comfortable with if you're going to put wean calves out into a cornfield. Let's just finish up a little bit here talking about some of the issues with grazing whole plant corn, some of the digestive upsets. Excessive cob intake will affect rumen pH. It will drop rumen pH below 5.8 or 5.5 in some instances. You get those rumen acidosis founder issues with our cows. So I strongly suggest adapting them to that cornfield or that corn grain, that corn crop coming off maybe just a dry hay or a senesced pasture. Maybe a bit of grain, maybe transition to rumen bugs prior to getting them on a complete diet of just whole plant corn. Make sure they're full when they go into that field. Don't have them hungry. Also, there's the whole aspect of addition a little extra rough. Add a little bit of fiber out there. and then limit. If you're concerned, maybe put them out for half a day and pull them off. We did some research in this area trying to investigate this issue of what happens to the rumen pH and other metabolic factors. So Divya Josie did this work a couple of years ago. Probably some of the first work looking at cannulated cows out in winter grazing paddocks. We used what we called an indwelling pH meter in these cows, so we were able to put this pH meter right into the cannula into the rumen itself, and so we're able to follow pH peaks and valleys while these cows are out in these three grazing systems, either grazing whole plant corn, grazing swath barley, or having a barley hay in the dry lot pen. Here you can see Divya sampling, a real trooper out there. Here we're looking at year 1 is the red bars, and year 2 are the green bars. And you know what happened is that not just beef cows like grazing whole plant corn, but other animals like to go out there and utilize corn as well. And so you're going to see some predation of your field, either with deer, possibly in this instance, we had thousands and thousands of starlings come in. And what they did is they utilized about 2/3 or more of every cob on the plant. And so we saw our starch per acre reduce significantly. And in fact, in year 1, we saw the reduction in pH, or the duration of pH being less than 5.8, which would be suggested of subacute rumen acidosis. Barley, swath barley was the culprit, but in year 2, corn was the culprit. So that really tells us that, yeah, if the cow is able to go out and just utilize either grain or maybe just cobs, we do need to bear that in mind for managing this particular crop. So let's talk a little bit about another study that another grad student, Brianna Anderson, has done. What about days of allocation of grazing and a fiber supplement? And so this is some work that she looked at the effect of 3 versus 9-day corn allocation, and with or without a fiber source. So we looked at the performance of the cows and on ruminal fermentation parameters. We know that cows will select those high energy plant structures. We've already seen that. Really, rumen acidosis can be a big issue based on Divya's work. And so the extent of the animal preference office is a result of stock density. That's the number of cows per unit area, or the time or the days of grazing that you give them. Current recommendations, which we're suggesting in other publications, is a 3-4 day window out there to reduce the risk of acidosis. They get that cob in the first 24 hours. Day 2 to day 3, they're going to have nothing to do but consume fiber to try and mitigate that rumen acidosis. The objectives of this work, I'll just touch on a couple of measures. Anna did a lot of different measures, but just we'll talk about beef cob performance and rumen pH dynamics. Let's look at the nutritive value of the corn in this particular study. The previous study had about 8% protein. Okay, and so you see the protein being a little bit lower here. So as I said, pregnant beef cows out there close to calving, maybe think about a protein supplement. Energy seems to be quite efficient. This is a high starch crop, okay, running about 19-20% starch. And let's look at the intake, where these cows got 3 days of feed with or without a fiber source. And so here we have 3 days of feed with a fiber, 9 days feed fiber, 3 days no fiber, 9 days no fiber. And you can see what's happening here. When we provided that low quality hay, that fiber supplement, there was a substitution of that taking place. They were eating less corn, okay? But did that help mitigate rumen pH? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Overall, though, they were grazing anywhere from about 18 pounds per day or kilos per day, sorry, of corn on that 3 day and a little bit higher on that 9 day allocation. How do the cows do? Well, this is their start weight, this is their end weight. All of these cows are actually gaining weight on that particular crop. And all these weights are adjusted for conceptus weight, okay? So taking the weight of the growing fetus off of these weights. So they're all doing quite well, including their body weight change, their ribid rump fat was actually increasing slightly, and their average daily gain also was doing quite well. What about the effect of adding that? Just touch on 3 points here. The first thing is that when we added fiber, Okay, the duration less than 5.8, as I said, was suggested that subacute rumen was less time when we added that fiber source compared to more time. It was less than 5.8 pH. Okay, so that fiber really is mitigating, not allowing that pH to drop significantly, and the area too was less. The other thing we saw is that when these cows first came in that day 1 in the start of the grazing period, or day 1 to 2, they ate a lot of cobs. We saw a drop in rumen pH. It came back to about normal here, 6.6, by the end of the grazing period. And finally, you can see here as well, duration and area less than 5.82 was a lot higher at the start of the grazing period compared to the end of the grazing period in this particular instance. So yeah, there is some thoughts there in terms of allocation, in terms of adding a fiber source. This is just a summary slide put together by Kathy Larson, our beef economist, just showing some of the research that we've done at Western Beef and the comparison to lower costs compared to dry lot feeding, swath grazing about 25%, bale graze 8%, straw chaff grazing, residue grazing about 30%, standing corn about 26%, and stockpile grazing about 15%. So that's just some economics for you to think about. I just want to summarize now and briefly talk a little bit about some of the highlights. Why would you graze standing corn? Well, you're doing two things. You're trying to reduce cow costs per day. You're also trying to capture those manure nutrients either through the urine or fecal that's deposited out there on that nutrient deficient site on your farm or your ranch. You really need to focus on agronomy. You do need to do your homework here. Work with a local agrologist, the corn reps. Work with your neighbor that likes to grow crops. If you don't like to grow crops, it's really high input, high risk, proper seeding rate, proper equipment, soil temperature, all those types of things. Weed pressure, big thing. I strongly suggest, if you've never grown corn, start small. 5-10 acres in year 1. Get comfortable with this. So you have to get used to growing corn. You have to be comfortable with it. The cows have to be comfortable with grazing it, okay? Everybody will get used to it, more experience year after year. Expand only as you feel you've gained that experience and you're accepted that system. You would consider, based on some of the work we found, probably adding a fiber source out there, okay, just to mitigate that rumen pH when grazing, and certainly we're strongly suggesting that 3 to 4 day allocation of grazing. When you're going to have cows out there, certainly think about wind protection. They will lose body condition. Corn actually is pretty good windbreak in some respects, but certainly have portable windbreaks or not with shelter belts out there. And I'll finally say, feed test. You know, feed tests cost about $40, $50. You know the energy content, you know the protein content of what you're starting with, and you can go from there in terms of supplementation. I just want to finish and invite you to click onto our website. There it is, wbdc.ca. All these videos are up there, fact sheets. A couple new ones out there. We've just posted a couple of videos highlighting some of our grad students. Courtney O'Keefe talking about stage maturity for grazing squash annuals. And our 2 corn grazing videos down here. Leah Pierce talking about winter grazing, myself of corn, and then Brianna Anderson shedding more light on the results of that 3 versus 9 day with or without a fiber source. So with that, Stacy, that's the end of my presentation, and welcome any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that, Bart. So we will open it up to questions. So if you do have any questions, I invite you to write them into that small chat window on the side of your screen. So if your chat window or if your webinar panel has disappeared, you should see a little orange arrow somewhere on your screen, and by clicking on that, you should be able to expand the chat panel and find the questions area. So we did have a couple questions come in ahead of time here. The one that was sent in is, are the number of calves a good determination of yield?
That's a great question. And you know, before I start a grazing corn.
Sorry, Bart, just a second here. You're really echoing. Did something come unplugged or anything?
No, it didn't.
Okay, sorry. So I think somebody, for some reason, somebody who's using a phone has managed to have audio. So if you are calling in over the phone, if you could please mute your phone, that would be really great. I think that's what's causing the problem. So go again, Bart, see if that works.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully you can hear me this time.
Perfect.
I guess when we first started grazing corn, I was always under the assumption that every cob, or sorry, every plant should have 2 cobs. That's incorrect. You really want to see 1 cob per plant, because then you know the plant is putting all of its resources into that cob. And usually the second cob is a juvenile, it's of lesser quality. And so you're dealing with every plant's going to have, 50% of it by weight will be tassel, stalk, leaf, stover, and then the other 50% will be cob. So 1 cob per plant is a suggestion.
All right. So we have lots of questions coming in here. We calve starting in January 1st. Is it advisable to swath graze these cows in November and December?
You want to repeat that question? I'm assuming they have some swath grazing annual cereal prior to the corn?
Yes. So they're calving in January 1st, and is it advisable to swath graze, or I'm assuming just use extended grazing for these cows in November and December, so up to the month before they're calving?
Okay, what I would do is I'd test that it could be a cool season, it could be a barley, it could be oat, could be millet cereal that could be grazing. I test it, I make sure that there's adequate energy protein coming into that 3rd trimester. I always pay attention to nutrition the last 3 weeks prior to calving, so make sure the adequate energy protein is coming from that swath crop. If not, I might bring in that little bit of supplement for sure. But yeah, you could swath graze right up until, probably 7-10 days prior to calving, as long as you know that there's adequate nutrients in that swath graze crop.
Okay. So there's a couple questions coming in here about toxins and what toxins you can find in corn.
Yeah, good question. Our experience was yes, fusarium is showing up. There's also T2, vomitoxin. We tested for them all a couple years in a row, especially those wet years that we've seen a lot of rainfall. We tested. We came back with levels that were less than harmful. Certainly, we still managed to monitor it. We still diluted. Okay, so you can appreciate that. Yeah, that there would be evidence of maybe fusarium in the cob for sure. That's generally where it's found. If you're concerned, you would be diluting. You maybe would be adding some type of fiber out there as well. Maybe only letting them in there for half of a day. Our levels were less than what was expected. I would strongly suggest, if you're concerned about that, to take a sample, send it to your diagnostic here in the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Barry Blakely is the contact there, and he would give you the talk to you about the results you get from your particular sample. We have not, obviously we've had low levels of it in some of our crops, but we have not seen any negative aspects from that issue of toxicity. They didn't show up too bad in 2017 because we were really quite dry compared to other years.
Okay. The next question here, what was your fiber source that you used when grazing the corn?
We used a low quality hay bale, a round bale, and so it was mostly grass. Okay, so yeah, you'd look for a low quality grass, maybe a little bit of legume if you try to be straight grass. You could even put a straw out there as well, but make sure you limit it. As I said, we found that low quality fiber acted as a substitution effect, and that we didn't see utilization of the corn like we wanted to. So yeah, you're looking for a low quality type fiber, a low quality hay, or maybe some straw.
All right, next question here. Would you suggest a dry mineral or a tub type mineral?
Minerals are interesting. They could be a whole webinar on themselves. There's ones that actually weather very well, and the ones that don't weather at all, they put them out there and they're like concrete the next day in the tub. We've always fed granular loose mineral, and we also feed it based on a recommendation of whatever 3 ounces of per head per day. We give them so much mineral for 7 to 10 days based on the number of cows. They eat all the mineral in 3 days. They don't get any until after that 7-day period. Otherwise, you go broke in front of them. So there's different types of minerals. Some are more palatable than others. So we've always fed a granular mineral with probably a good robust level of copper, zinc, and manganese in it, and certainly pay attention to that 2-to-1 ratio, depending on the type of crop they're grazing.
All right. So the next question here, how do you determine the area that you need for a 3-day allocation for 100 cows?
Yeah, that's always the moving target. So, you know, I always figure that a cow's average weight cow, 1,400-pound cow, in there somewhere. We look at about, you know, 2.5% body weight is what she's going to consume. So do the math. Hopefully you all have a weight scale at home. You know the average mature body weight of your cows. So she's going to need 30, 40 pounds dry matter of something. And so, you know, your corn is going to yield, you know, as we see, about 5, maybe 5.5 tons per acre. If you really want to measure your biomass, you can cut down 17.5 feet of the row and weigh that, and then just take a subsample, put it in your microwave, and convert it to dry matter. 17.5 feet a row is analogous or extrapolates to 1/1000th of an acre. So yeah, so you're going to need about 30, 40 pounds of something based on 2.5% body weight, and then you'll know how many rows of corn to give them. I strongly suggest too that dividing up your paddocks. We've always used a front end loader to walk down the fence lines, or maybe a quad. The other thing you can do if you're sneaky is that you'll move your seed drill over a couple of rows and not even plant any corn on your fence line. So strategy and planning prior to seeding this crop will help you significantly come that November, December time period by laying out your fence lines. We always fence our fields with high tensile perimeter, maybe 2-strand. Get your cows trained in respecting electric fence, and then we'll use that single poly just for cordoning off that 3 to 4 days of grazing.
Okay, next question here. When should I do a feed test on my standing corn? So how many days after the frost is what they're asking.
Yeah, you know, there's always the question about frost and nitrates. You know, nitrates tend to accumulate in the lower part of the stalk, and that's probably the last structure that the cows will eat. I would suggest you do your feed test just, you know, a week or so prior to putting your cows out there, so then you'll know what you're dealing with. Work with your nutritionists as well. The provincial government has 10 offices around the province. In Saskatchewan, work with the livestock specialists to build a diet around grazing corn.
Okay, to go with that question, how do I go about taking a proper feed sample?
That's another moving target question. What I would suggest you do is you look at your 20 acres or 30 acres of corn, and you go out and you subsample possibly 5, 6 areas, and just harvest 2 or 3 plants from each of those areas. Bring it back. You might have to chop it up. Wood chippers we've used. Other people have used, you know, cutting shears and those types of things, and just you know, deposit that sample of all those plants, and then you would send that in as well.
Okay. The next question here, have you done any research regarding the taste of beef from feeding corn? They're asking because they've always grazed their cows on corn since 2000, but haven't considered finishing because they heard there could be negative taste implications.
I have not heard any negative implications about the flavor of the beef of animals finishing on this crop. No, and really, I would think it would be a crop that would provide adequate energy for sure. As I said, maybe protein would be a little deficient, but nothing that I know of. I've not heard of any issues about the flavor enhancement from corn grazing.
Okay. The next question here is: yield of grain crop equivalent to the nutritive quality?
Is yield of grain crop equivalent to nutritive quality? It does, yeah. As you've seen from my one slide looking at nutritive value of the cob versus the rest of the plant, a lot of energy comes from the cob, absolutely. So the corn is an interesting plant. It's a warm season crop. It's a C4, so that's why the soil needs to be warm. And it starts out where nutrients generally are in the stalk and the leaf, and as the cob starts to form, the plant actually translocates the nutrients into forming the cob, and so that's why I say again, only one cob per plant. Otherwise, you're going to not have good mature cobs, hopefully at that half milk line.
Okay. So we do have lots of questions here still. So I think within the next minute or so, I'm going to cut it off and only do the ones that come in after you're done answering this one. So just to let you know, if you have any burning questions, get them in right away. So next question here, would you have any recommendations regarding any other forages that you could grow with corn to help complement and add fiber to the diet?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're seeing some folks growing in between the row, possibly a legume. Okay, so maybe a climbing legume like maybe a hairy vetch or something like that. There's also been some folks that maybe put an annual legume in there, maybe a clover or something like that, a bursting clover or crimson clover. So yeah, there's that possibility. I mean, they're putting it there for the protein more than for the fiber. So double cropping is not an old art. It's where you grow one crop and have another crop coming in a little bit later on. But I have heard of other producers or other folks putting in a second crop, maybe not for the fiber as much, maybe as that protein.
Would feeding supplemental sodium bicarbonate aid in reducing the risk of rumen acidosis?
Probably not, because the rumen microflora tend to really offer a lot of things coming into the rumen. So you're better off just the rumen needs what we call effective NDF. So it needs a certain level of fiber to function properly and maintain that proper pH at about 6, a little bit greater than 6.61. And so fiber source coming from NDF, coming from the cellulose, hemicellulose part of that fiber is very important. So that's where we're suggesting a low quality hay or possibly a straw.
Okay. So another person here would like, could you explain the milk line again, please?
Right. So what happens is that the corn cob itself is starting to move the starch into the kernel. Okay, and so you'll see it starting at the interior of the cob and moving out towards the end of the kernel. And so you'll see a line forming, and as that starch is being deposited, that line will slowly move out. And so when it's halfway along the kernel, we call that half milk line. That's hopefully when your first milk frost will occur. And so we're saying, okay, if you're concerned about that, you don't want it to be too mature. Full mature kernel, we call that black layer. That's grain. That's where you take it off, combine it. So we're saying maybe plant that crop a little bit later so it never reaches that black layer, or maybe use a variety that's about 200 heat units greater than what you get in your area. So it still is a slightly immature, that first killing frost.
Okay. Is there a difference in the biomass yield of a cob in the R2 to R4 varieties compared to the R5 that you suggested?
I can't comment on that having seen any data, but I would think that the cob would be a little lower dry matter of the total plant biomass.
Okay. So then I have a couple questions here coming in again, follow-up questions about feed testing.
Yes.
So about how much of the plant you include. One person here asks if it's valuable to only include half the cob. How much of the plant, I guess, is what you want to, do you want to include?
You know, you've seen the data that we had there. We showed the nutrient value of the whole plant. That would be all structures were in that feed test sample. So tassel, stalk, leaf, stover, and cob. So, you know, equal value of structures in that sample, or just the cob. If you only want to feed test, maybe, like I say, take from 5 or 6 locations, chop it, composite, send in maybe 2 samples. Make sure that you're putting equivalent, you know, composition of every structure of the whole plant. So half and half cob and half stalk and leaf and tassel and stover. Okay. You're thinking, okay, what's the cow going to eat? She's going to eat, yeah, she'll eat cobs first day, but she's going to eat fiber, forced to eat the other structures day 2, day 3. So she's going to consume, you know, on average, hopefully the whole plant. We try to get what's the energy protein of the
plant. Okay. The next question here: how far is too far for a cow to walk for water?
Good question. You know, the rule of thumb is no greater than a mile and a half. In the winter, you know, we provide a water point or a water source, wet well. We have some wet wells. We have obviously dugouts that we pump to a wet well. We have insulated troughs. We have cross-feed nose pumps. We have all those systems. You know, I find that you need to provide that water source for a research facility. That exercise is good when they're out there in the field, and so you know, not more than that mile and a half to walk. Now, if there's good adequate snow depth, that's one thing I didn't touch on, the snow grazing. A lot of producers will snow graze, but obviously have that field if they're snow graze, not the cornfield, have a separate field. Make sure there's adequate depth and good soft fluffy snow. Get them trained to snow graze too. Don't just throw them out there and assume they're going to know that that's the water source. But you know, some folks don't like to do that. But I've also seen cows won't come to the water point. The water, you know, the frost-free nose pump or the insulated trough, they'll stay out there and lick snow on those nice hot sunny days. So.
Okay. Next question here: are nitrates a big concern?
Yeah, I touched on nitrates just about 3 questions back. Nitrates, you need to manage and monitor, and it's always good to test for them. They tend to not be an issue in corn because they do tend to be in that lower part of the stalk. So, you know, so obviously, that's probably the last structure that the cow would consume. But certainly manage and monitor. I've, you know, always test for nitrates. You know, 0.5%, anything greater could be an issue. Dilute if you're concerned. Maybe only graze, you know, a few hours a day. Dilute. Manage and monitor.
The next one here is about when you're planning out your allocation for the 3 days. So essentially, is the goal to have them eat all the cobs in the first day, the tassel and leaves the next day, and the stalk the 3rd day? Are you doing it right if that's what they do?
Well, what you're going to see in the first day is that they'll eat. Some cows will just eat cobs. Some will get smart and eat cobs and fiber, even in the first day. So you'll see, you know, 80–90% of the cobs disappear on day 1. And, you know, I'm suggesting 3–4 days. You know what? If it gets real cold, then you might have to move that wire every 2 days. So that's why you're out there managing, monitoring. They'll let you know. Sometimes, you know, they'll come running because they know when you show up, the fence is going to get moved. Maybe just wait a half a day. Maybe move that fence at noon, not early in the morning. So it's really all about weather. You know, we've had some warm spells in our last few winters, and so we've had to back off, right? Not move it. Maybe move it only every 5 days because there's still lots of corn there to graze. cows, you know, you're not going to get a fresh patch. But in those cold days, you might have to move it quicker, sooner, more often, maybe every 2 days. So it's really observing what's the residue, what's on the ground, and then go from there.
Okay. Could a higher quality hay product like alfalfa second cut be used as both your fiber and protein supplement?
Yeah, it could be, absolutely. So it's all cost effective. So what is your most cost effective protein source to put out there if you're going to graze pregnant cows well into that third trimester? So yeah, obviously alfalfa, whatever it's priced, wherever you live, possibly could be a fiber source. It's a very high energy fiber source. I might use alfalfa hay just if those cows are getting close to calving, maybe go with a lower quality hay prior to that. But that's my comment.
Okay. When temperatures drop down below -25, do we need to add an extra energy source, or is the standing corn in itself sufficient?
Good question. Normally it is. It depends on where it's at, maturity is at, coming into the grazing season. If it was touched by frost, those cobs didn't get to full maturity, like half milk or something. And the other thing too is watch your cow condition. If you see them starting to lose condition, yes, you might have to step in with an energy, especially that -25, -30, -35. Absolutely. If you see them starting to lose condition, you might have to step in. So it's a great crop. Normally you wouldn't have to, but in extremely cold weather, you need to observe your cows and watch that body condition. 1 to 5 on a 5-point scale. You want to try and maintain them at that 2.5, somewhere in there.
So you talked about 90% utilization. How do you measure that, and how confident are you in that number?
Fairly confident in all the years of corn grazing we've been doing. Some years we don't reach 90% because there are differences in palatabilities of different varieties, and you'll find that out. You'll find that this variety is what my cows like, and I'll try to switch to a different one, and they just don't utilize it as much. But yeah, some years we don't reach that 90% utilization. Well, how do I know that? Because I've weighed the biomass prior to grazing. I know how many pounds per acre or how many kilos per hectare, and also we weigh the residue in our research. So we're weighing our biomass pre and post grazing, which is not normally what a producer would do.
So a couple more questions here, and then I'm going to cut it off. Have you seen any effects of corn harming cows' feet because of too much energy?
I've heard that, yes. And I've had lots of veterinarians call me, and they've rang me up, and the producers had cows go down, and actually lost some cows grazing corn. In most cases, it was because they were given them too many days of grazing, and they were able to pick those tops off the plant too many days in a row. So sometimes some cows just don't handle corn, and so they do get foundered a little bit, and so yeah, there has been some conversations, some cases where that would occur. So certainly, you'd have to manage and monitor again. And so, as I say, try it. If you do see some of these issues cropping up, maybe corn is not the system that's going to work for you and your operation. Maybe some of those other wintering systems I talked about.
Okay, and we'll end it with this last question here. If a corn plant hasn't produced a cob due to drought, what is the nutrient value of that at that point?
Yeah, we've had drought, we've had frost, and so our grazing days have dropped from 200 down to 50. The cows just go through it like a storm. There's nothing there to hold them. So I would think that it's a lot lower than what the normal energy protein values were. I would suggest that it's probably, you know, below that 7% protein and probably below that 60% TDN. So if you're grazing a crop of corn due to drought, didn't produce any cobs, simply do a feed test. Then you know what you're dealing with at the get-go, and there's no surprises as to why maybe your cows might lose condition.
Okay, well, like I said, I think we're going to end the question period there, but I would strongly encourage you to talk to your regional extension specialist through your province or a nutritionist about this if you do have further questions, as well as I will be sending out some additional resources as well. I just have a couple more things to let you know about before we go. The first is how to get more information and science-based production advice through the Beef Cattle Research Council. You can go to our website, beefresearch.ca, and click the subscribe button to sign up to our free email list if you haven't already. If you have a Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube account, you can connect with us there as well. And I'd also want to remind you about our next webinar, which will be coming up on November 16th, about Are Your Bulls Actually Siring Calves? So very shortly, as soon as this webinar is done, you will be asked to complete a short survey that asks about tonight's session and what you found most interesting in for future, or what you're most interested in. We really do need your feedback on your operation and helps you make informed decisions on what's best for you. So as I already mentioned, you're going to be receiving an email from me within the next couple of days with a link to watch the recording, as well as some additional supplemental information. So that's it. Thank you for everybody at home for joining us tonight. And on behalf of everybody, thank you, Bart, for volunteering your time and expertise tonight. Good night.
Good night.